Chapter 14. It didn't matter that the temperature outside her suit was near absolute zero. It didn't matter that she was trapped in what should have been one of the coldest places in the universe. What mattered was her suit didn't seem to understand the difference between comfort and sweatbox. Kelly struggled to pull another piece of debris from the pile. It finally came loose, bringing down more debris with it. Dickerson was having the same issue, although he was having more difficulty with his damaged shoulder. What she thought would only take a few minutes was taking a lot longer. Since they had no idea what was really above the slip point or how much damage had been done topside, she had drastically miscalculated the amount of debris that had clumped together. Even in ZG, pulling on a piece frequently pulled another piece with it. The tangle of metal, plastic, and Void knew what else was so compacted that it might take them half an hour to clear the space. But the worst part was the fact that every piece they removed had to be jettisoned backward through the tunnel to keep from clogging it up again. "Fucking Sisyphean," Kelly muttered.
"What's that, Corporal?"
Dickerson asked in a pained, breathy voice. She stopped and pointed at the clutter. "This. We pull, we remove, and more shit gets jammed in there." She sat back on her haunches, doing her best to pop her vertebrae. "What's the point?" Dickerson let go of a large piece of debris and turned to face her.
"Well, Corporal, at least we're in agreement on that."
She couldn't see his face through the visor, but she thought she heard a smile in his voice. "Why didn't you say something?" He shrugged, his bad shoulder dropping slightly.
"Not my place,"
he said. She shook her head. "I think this was a mistake,"
"Well, as mistakes go, it's not exactly the worst in the universe,"
he said.
"You think we should go further down the slip point?"
"What do you think?" He paused for a moment, his helmet facing the cluttered egress.
"I think that might be the right thing to do,"
he said, and jerked a thumb backward.
"Besides, Carb says everything's clear back there. Probably make better time."
"Yeah," she said with a nod. "Fuck this." She stood from her crouch and raised her hands to the ceiling. Her ribs immediately screamed in pain and she grimaced beneath her helmet. "Have to stop doing that," she told herself. While she pulled on the debris, the pain had been little more than pinches, tiny lightning bolts across the tortured tissue and bone. But lifting her arms like that? More like detonating a flechette in her upper chest. Dickerson stood beside her, one hand rubbing at his bad shoulder.
"Damn it,"
he said.
"Can't even feel my fingers through this suit." "You can always take it off,"
Carb said.
"I know icing it down would help." "Ha ha,"
he said in a mock laugh.
"Why don't you keep quiet back there and focus on the luggage?" "Joke 'em if they can't take a fuck,"
Carb said. Kelly couldn't help but smile. At least Dickerson and Carb could keep her entertained while she led them to certain death. She shook away the thought and made her way back to the slip point shaft, Dickerson on her heels. The egress point would have brought them so close to an emergency station, they'd practically have been there. Instead, they were going to have to travel down the lightless shaft another 40 meters before reaching the next port side egress. To make matters worse, the next junction was a four-way, putting them at risk for attacks from above and below, as well as from the port side. She didn't like it, but couldn't think of an alternative. "Elliot, how you doing?" Kelly asked.
"Still here,"
he said. He sounded better, more energetic, and in less pain.
"Finally starting to breathe easier."
"Good," she said. "If things get nasty up ahead, I may need you to do some walking and flying."
"Won't that be fun?"
Elliot said. He paused for a moment and then sighed.
"Hi, boss. Understood."
She smiled. He was doing better. Carb had maglocked him to the wall, and he'd been able to rest while Kelly and Dickerson tried to clear the egress. That had been, 10 minutes ago? 15? Didn't matter. Every moment he wasn't moving around or being jostled was a gift to the bio-nannies, allowing them to do their jobs without distraction. "No, if only ours could get some rest," she said off comms. That was the problem. As long as she and Dickerson were doing all the heavy lifting, so to speak, their nannies weren't getting a chance to repair or even dull their pain. After this many hours of exertion, she wasn't sure the microscopic machines even had enough material to work with. Kelly looked down the slip point shaft, her helmet lights not strong enough to illuminate the next junction. "Okay," she said. "Carb, get Elliot ready to move. Dickerson?" He turned to her, but said nothing. "How's the shoulder?" "Be better after a beer and some THC. "Can you keep going?" He chuckled.
Do I have a choice?
No, she said, a grin creeping across her face. But I need to know if you can still hold a rifle,
No offense, Corporal,
he said.
but when I can't hold a rifle, I'm already fucking dead.
Good answer, she said. Out of the 4 members of the squad, Carb seemed the least damaged. She was also the weakest, physical strength-wise, at least from the reports Kelly had read when she took over the squad so many weeks ago. Was it really weeks? She felt as though they'd been on Mira for years.
Ready, boss?
Carb said. Kelly checked her rear cam. Elliot was slung over her shoulder once again, her rifle held firmly in her hands. Good. Dickerson, you ready?
Aye, Corporal.
He said.
Same formation?
Until I say otherwise. An awkward silence fell over the comms. Kelly did her best not to sigh. Okay, squad, forward. She detached from the floor and used a free MacLeod to gain momentum. Carb and Dickerson followed suit, the squad floating down the slip point shaft at a slow pace. From here, the shaft looked fairly clean. Bits of debris floated near the ceiling, but nothing they couldn't simply brush aside or ignore altogether. Both horizontal and vertical slip points assumed the occupants would float parallel to its intended direction rather than perpendicular. As such, the ceiling was relatively low for Dickerson, and he had to be careful to keep from hitting his head. Had the slip point been powered, the shaft would have taken care of that problem for him. Kelly did her best to ignore her cams and focus instead on the darkness before her. She flicked her eyes across the visor cam, looking for shadows that seemed out of place or movement, but only the occasional piece of debris caught her attention.
Not that I'm complaining,
Dickerson said.
but why aren't they in here? You mean the pine cones?
Carb asked.
Yeah, they were stuffed into the corridors. Why aren't they here too?
Good question, Kelly said. When we get back to Black, maybe the trio will have some answers for us.
The trio,
Carb spat.
may have left these poor fuckers out in space to die. Yeah.
Elliot said.
Why did Captain Kovacs say that? I can't believe they'd do that.
Kelly frowned, doing her best to absorb their words while scanning for possible threats down the shaft. Kovacs seemed to think the trio knew what was out there, and it doesn't sound to me like they made it to Proxima Centauri B. Hell, didn't sound like they ever had any intention of making it there.
So why the big cover-up?
Dickerson asked.
You telling me SF Gov convinced all of humanity to spend precious resources and cooperate on the largest, most expensive endeavor in human history on the basis of a lie? For what purpose? And if they weren't planning on going to PCB, just where the fuck were they going?
I don't know, Kelly said. I also don't understand how they managed to keep Mira's actual design a secret. Humans had to have been involved in the construction of both the refinery and the shuttle bay. I can't for a second believe the trio did that and managed to hide it.
No,
Dickerson said.
You're right. Mira's crew sure as hell knew what was going on. They had to be in on it. In on it? Conspiracy? Who the fuck cares?
Carb said in a raspy growl.
These folks are dead, and we're going to join them if we don't find a way out of here.
That shut everyone up. In a way, Kelly was glad for the silence, but the questions kept rattling around her mind. Why would the trio even agree to be part of something like this? And just how many SF Gov, SF Navy, and SFMC officials were involved? If humanity ever discovered the truth, what would happen? Another civil war between Mars and Earth, with the stations caught in between? Who gained from that? Something moved in the darkness ahead. Kelly's breathing hitched. It moved again. Slow down, she said, her voice a near whisper. She dragged her glove against the shaft wall, halving her speed. Possible bogey up ahead. Copy, Dickerson and Carb said simultaneously. Kelly activated her MacLeod and ramped down the magnetics to the lowest level. The drag would help slow her, but not fix her to the wall, allowing her to easily break the attractive field. The something moved again, darting from wall to wall. Halt, she said, and increased the magnetic field. She came to an abrupt stop, her body leaning forward from the minor jolt. Dickerson, you see it?
Aye, Corporal,
he said.
Whatever that is, it ain't a piece of debris. It's not moving like one of the pinecone things either.
Kelly narrowed the focus on her lights, changing the diffuse, wide-area illumination to concentrated beams. An amorphous form flipped through the beams of light across the slip point. Something a little larger strayed through the beams, moving even faster. Kelly's nerves sizzled with fear. The slip point floor vibrated beneath her feet.
What the fuck was that?
Carb asked. Dickerson groaned into the mic.
Corporal, we have a serious problem. Check my cam.
Kelly brought up his feet and looked. Dickerson was facing the opposite end of the slip point, his light stabbing through the gloom. Something large was floating down the hall, silver glinting in its center. "Oh shit," she said. "Jet now!"
But...
Carb started to say.
Fucking move!
Dickerson yelled. Kelly detached from the wall and hit her suit thrusters. Her fuel gauge quickly descended from the middle of the crimson warning pie slice down to the very bottom. She blasted forward at 5 meters per second, quickly approaching the area where she'd seen the shapes moving in the darkness. She no longer had to wonder what they were. Dozens of small, starfish-like creatures floated and undulated through the ZG, reaching the left wall and then bouncing to the right. Some pushed from the ceiling to the floor. The tiny life forms bounced off her helmet and suit as she quickly passed them. A check of her rear cam showed Carb and Dickerson following her lead at similar speeds. But behind Dickerson, the large version was still pulling itself down the shaft even faster. It was going to catch them. Something struck the back of her neck. Kelly ignored it and continued flying forward, the lights from her helmet bouncing as she flicked her head around, looking for threats. Her mind barely had time to process what she was seeing, her mouth opening in wonder. On the shaft's ceiling, webs of silvery liquid combined to cradle an oblong, misshapen hive covered with perforations about the size of a fingernail. "Doc!" she yelled into the mic.
God damn it!
Dickerson screamed. Kelly didn't have time to check the rear cam, but she saw the flash from a flechette round blowing up behind them. She continued forward past 2 more hives, her flechette rifle pointed down the shaft, finger tight on the trigger. The next junction was less than 5 meters away. Another web, waist high, blocked the route to the port side. "Keep flying!" Dickerson breathed heavily into the mic.
That thing is right behind me. Going to light it up.
Kelly moved herself to the wall with an attitude burn. Her HUD flashed red. She had enough fuel for maybe one more burn. After that, she'd have to use her mag gloves and boots for momentum, and that meant having to slow down. Cursing, she powered up one of the mag gloves to full and clutched the wall. Carb and Elliot flew past her as another round exploded behind her. She turned and nearly screamed. The starfish thing practically filled the shaft, its arms bending to make room, maw open and salivating silver. Dickerson floated backward and horizontal, head held up just high enough to keep the shaft in his camera view. His flechette rifle sent another round 5 meters down the corridor. The rocket-propelled projectile missed the center mass and instead exploded with arcs of electricity near the joint connecting one of the arms to the center mass. The creature froze, its long arms bending to cover its mouth. Dickerson floated past her just as the thing's arms pushed outward, the ends smashing into the Atmos steel. It opened its mouth wide and shot a jet of silvery liquid. The thing's aim was off, the ropey substance squirting past Dickerson and down the shaft. With a yell, Kelly pulled the trigger on her rifle. The round detonated inside the thing's mouth. The creature seemed to swallow and then belched blue arcs of electricity before finally curling its arms around itself. Kelly fired another for good measure, spun herself using the wall, and pushed off after Dickerson. The large Marine had already slowed and reoriented himself to a near-standing position.
You okay, Corporal?
She swallowed hard and tried to steady herself. "I'm fine," she managed. "Is that thing dead?"
Well, it sure as hell ain't moving its arms anymore or spitting that shit at us.
He gestured down the shaft.
We backtracking to that junction? Fuck no, we aren't.
Elliot said.
You guys may have been a little busy, but I saw what was down there. Hell no. What'd you see?
Carb asked.
More of those silvery webs, and whatever those insect cocoons were.
Elliot groaned.
Just get me off this fucking ship already. Cocoons?
Dickerson asked.
Is that what I saw above me?
I don't think they're cocoons exactly, Kelly said. More like hives.
Shit.
Carb said.
So what, the little ones live in there?
Kelly allowed herself to float down the hall until she reached Carb. Dickerson had already maglocked himself next to her. That's what it looked like to me, Kelly said. I don't know how many of the small ones could live in there, but I imagine they could swarm us pretty easily.
Just better hope they can't spit,
Dickerson said.
Else we are truly fucked.
The image of an entire hive exploding outward with thousands of the little starfish creatures all expelling the silvery acid made her cringe. There would be no way to survive that in tight corners, and since they were still in the ship, slip point shafts and corridors would become death traps. She pushed the thoughts away and focused on the ceiling. There were no maintenance hatches. Maybe there were some in the egress points leading off the shaft. Kelly brought up the schematics on her HUD and checked their position. They'd missed 2 egresses now. The next would be the last before they ran out of midships and were forced aft. And going there was the last goddamn place she wanted to be. "We need to make the next egress," she said. "Whatever's there, we're going to have to try and get through it," Dickerson said.
"Don't know what ate the goddamn fusion drives, but I sure as fuck don't want to meet it." "Or,"
Harb said.
"end up in the cargo bay." "Copy that,"
Elliot said.
"Fuck that place."
Kelly checked her HUD again. Yep, enough fuel for one more burn, and a small one at that. "Squad, how's your fuel?" It was as bad as she thought. Carb had 4 burns left in her, Dickerson 2. Maybe. "Time to use those mag gloves and boots," she said. "Only burn if it's an absolute goddamned emergency and you're going to die if you don't."
"Copy, Corporal,"
Dickerson said.
"Back to mag walking?"
She nodded. "Back to mag walking. It's going to slow us down, but going to be a lot safer now that we know they can create those webs."
"No shit,"
Harb said.
"I don't think we want to know what happens if we get caught in one of those."
Kelly couldn't agree more.